We're going to start this puppy up. Clear? Prop?
And welcome back to Tip of the Week, building the Affordaplane. In this part, because you've been waiting all winter for me to resume back to building, and we have just enough warmth now that we can get back, but this is the time you've been waiting for, and I mean wait. If you notice here, we have our digital scale, and what we're doing is weighing one of the wings along with its flaperon. We have also weighed the fuselage, and in this part, we're going to add up all of those weights to get a good estimate of what this project is going to come in at. Why? Because it's very soon that we need to disclose the engine that is appropriate for this build. Now, why have we waited so long for this? Mainly, we want to completely finish these parts. We wanted the wing to be done with all the parts and pieces, the struts and the hinges and the bolts and the flaperons all completed. Same with the fuselage. All the tail components are done, the hinges and the bolts, and that was all weighed together, because a lot of parts and pieces, if you leave off, are going to mess you up at the end. So we're far enough along that the weights I'm going to show you are going to be pretty accurate. And with those numbers, we can see what we have left for things like the engine, the fabric, and lots of little parts and pieces that still need to go into it.
And since we know what everything weighs approximately, does that mean we can choose an engine and disclose it in this video? And the answer is yes. We will disclose what engine is going to be used on our Affordaplane project. So stay with us. Well, it has come time to talk about weights. If you've been following along, you know what we've built so far. So when I describe fuselage, you know that the fuselage is almost done. Not everything, but a lot or most of the components have been fitted. And this includes the tail, the rudder, everything that we have built so far on the fuselage. And so I'm going to give you the number. I weighed it recently with a hook and beam, digital scale, and found out how much it weighs. And there it is, 120 pounds. Now, I also weighed the wings. If you've been following along, you know that we have completed the wings. We completed the flaps, and those are also included with the wing, as well as the strut attachments. The only thing that's not on there is the fabric and the struts, and we'll add those in a little bit later. The wings come in at, and the magic number is 29 pounds, but we have two of them. So that gives us a total of 58 pounds. Now, the struts, because we haven't rigged the wings yet, we'll be doing that in an upcoming video. The struts, 2 pounds apiece, 4 of them, so that was another 8 pounds. Let's add those numbers up. Total weight of 186 pounds so far. But let's also talk about what is not included here. Before we do that, let's subtract that number from our magic number of 254. If our total max is 254 to keep it Part 103 legal, 68 pounds. So we have 186 pounds between our fuselage and wings, and that leaves 68 pounds. And the purpose of all this, remember, was to find out how much we have left for the engine. However, what is not included so far? Our fabric covering has not been included here. Let's take just a wild guess at it. Now I'm going to do my best to keep this low, but I'm going to say at least 15 pounds is going to go towards the fabric. The fabric itself will probably weigh around 5 pounds, 6 pounds. I'm just pulling these numbers out of my hat at the moment based on experience. And then of course the coatings we put, very minimal coatings we put on there. So about 15 pounds for the fabric. Then under miscellaneous, there's all sorts of things we have not included yet, right? We still got some cables to put in, our rudder cables, the other cables that hold our wings taut to the fuselage, some more nuts and bolts, the fairing underneath our legs, the instrument panel, all sorts of things. So this is a big question mark, but I'm going to put down 10 pounds of things we just haven't included yet. Now 15 and 10 is 25. I'm going to take 25 away from the 68 remaining, and that gives us 43. So why do I keep making those numbers go smaller and smaller? Because we haven't included the engine. And here's our challenge. We only have 43 pounds left for the engine. Of course, we have some estimates over here. And above, we have some very accurate numbers with our wing and fuselage. But the point is that the engine needs to be incredibly light because we're trying to build a Part 103 legal aircraft. So, when we talk about what engine that we can use, we are constrained by a very light weight. We only have certain areas we can play with at this point. Keep our fabric and covering as light as possible. Keep this miscellaneous as light as possible. These are all possible numbers, but we got to work at them. Now, do we have an engine with an installed weight, and we'll talk about engine weights in a moment here, that's in this neighborhood?
So what choices do we have for an engine? Knowing that our weight requirement is about 45 pounds, that's installed weight. Now keep in mind, when you go online or look at catalogs for engines, they will publish a weight. Oftentimes that weight does not include some heavy items like radiators, mufflers, mounting brackets, and other items that you have to use to make the engine run. So we're going to weigh the engine we chose, and I'll show you that the installed weight is definitely higher than the published weight. That's just the way things are. So you need to be careful when comparing things. So our installed weight has to be in the mid 40-pound range, between 40 and 50. And we also want to make sure that the engine is well established, meaning we don't want them produced from a company that's just been in business for a year or two. We don't want to experiment quite that much. We also don't want to choose an engine that you can't purchase anymore. For example, the great Rotax engine family, they do not make two-cycle engines anymore, so they're out of the running. We don't have that many choices left. But one set of engines that did stand out as a great contender was the Polinis. Polini is an Italian manufacturer of two-stroke engines, and their main market is for the paramotor industry, where you strap on the pack on your back and drag a parachute through the air. They've been making those for quite a while, and that's the engine we chose. We chose the Polini 202. This is their smallest engine that is water cooled. It is 33 horsepower, so that's at the lower end of the horsepower range for the Affordaplane. But that's a good thing, because I think a lot of us wondered how much power is necessary. Will 33 horse provide adequate power for this aircraft? We're going to find out, and that's why I wanted to make sure we started at the low end. The weight, now Polini publishes the 202 at 37 pounds. You will see when we weigh it, the actual installed weight is 44 pounds, so it's 7 pounds more. That's with everything attached and weighed. So that 44 pounds comes right in at where we need to be, so we should have a legal ultralight with that engine. Another benefit of the Polini family is if you want 5 more horsepower and can find 8 more pounds approximately of weight, they have the Polini 303, 5 more horses. The Polini 202 is water cooled, electronic ignition, a very high RPM with a reduction drive and a clutch so that the propeller is not engaged at low RPMs. Some of you may ask, why go with a liquid cooled engine with the weight and expense of a radiator? It turns out that on a 2-cycle engine, that liquid cooling is a great plus because of minimizing shock cooling. In other words, think about when you take off at full power and you keep that at full power all the way up to attitude, you get the engine very, very hot. And then you decide to go through the pattern and land. All of a sudden you're back to idle now. Things are cooling way down. It's simply idling. So you've gone from extreme hot to extreme cool, and of course the expansion and contraction. And then especially if you're doing a touch and go and you slam it on full power again, now you're heating it way up. So liquid cooling, as opposed to just air cooling, helps to moderate those extreme temperature changes by keeping the liquid cooling going at all times. So that's a good thing for a 2-cycle engine. It just tends to be on the smaller engines. You don't see a lot of liquid cooling because of the weight, etc. So this is a great feature to have on this engine. The best way to learn more about the Polini 202 and their other engines is to look. There'll be a link below in the description. Polini has created a fantastic YouTube video that describes the engine and all of its details. It's fun to watch, very well done. I highly recommend watching it. You can learn more about that engine than just reading about it quickly. A lot of high-tech stuff went into that engine. This is not your Rotax or Hertz from 10, 20 years ago. This is all very new features, and hopefully that'll be a good thing. There are other engines out there that might be suitable. I'm not saying this is the absolute best engine. If those of you that have other suggestions for this, please put them in the comments below. Now keep in mind, we need an installed weight, not a published weight from the vendor, but an installed weight of about 45 pounds. So please don't come up with suggestions of engines that are way outside of that. Remember, our goal was to have a legal Part 103 ultralight by the time we're done.
There we go. Now here I am weighing the engine. I still have it crated in its metal frame, but that's because it sure makes it easier to find a place to hook it onto. I loaded it up on the frame with the radiator and all of the other components that need to be included in its installed weight so that we get a good, honest, accurate weight measurement. There's the radiator, and behind it is the package with the ring and other mounting parts in it. So this weight will be very accurate. I simply have to weigh the frame and deduct that from the total weight, and that will give us the installed weight. So the weight figures that I'm going to provide are not from the manufacturer, but from me actually weighing it. And what I'm going to include in the engine weight, as we call it now, is the ring that you need to attach to the aircraft, all of the hardware and tubes, propeller flange, bolts. This bracket is used to mount the radiator. The radiator will be included with this weight because it becomes permanently attached to the engine by way of this bracket. And then the engine itself. So we like to get the full installed weight. The only thing missing would be the fluid inside of the radiator, and that could be easily calculated once we're up and running. The propeller that I have selected is the E-prop. The E-prop is made in France, and these have been used on Polini engines for quite a while. That's why I went with it. They have experience. This one was made for the Polini 202 and for the tractor configured Affordaplane. In other words, I just talked with them and told them exactly what I was doing. I had the 202. They're familiar with that engine because they use that engine on paragliders. But of course, a paraglider is not a tractor. It pushes rather than pulls, or vice versa, depending which way you look at it. But I needed this for a tractor configuration, and they knew exactly what to create. Basically, from a length standpoint, everyone wants to know how long is your propeller. 28, so times 2, so it's a 56-inch propeller. And what's kind of interesting is two things. Number one, kind of neat how this goes together. Watch this. Because of the way this hub is formed, it simply slides together. The bolts match up, and now you have a propeller. The other part of this is that this entire propeller weighs less than 2 pounds. In other words, each blade is under a pound. Very light. It's all carbon fiber. And most important thing is how it performs on the engine. In other words, how much pulling power we get, and we'll talk more about that later. But so for the weight standpoint, we got 2 pounds because there is some hardware, the flange, so I want to round it up to the full 2 pounds, and that will be sitting on the hub of the engine. And we'll talk more about propellers forthcoming. Now, it's great to have an engine and a propeller, but we need to have a way to mount that engine onto our aircraft. Now, we have the ring that Polini provided, but that's only part of the equation. The big issue is how do we mount the ring and the engine to our airframe? Couple of issues: weight and balance. In other words, based on the weight of the engine, how far away from the aircraft does the engine need to be to maintain the balance that is critical? And then structurally, how do we attach it? We don't want this vibrating mass of machinery to somehow slip off, fall off, or otherwise we don't want to overdo a mass amount of weight to attach this. And so the good news is this has all been figured out, because one of our Patreon members, Oscar, has done quite a bit of really wonderful creative work in coming up with a way to attach the engine to our airframe without using any welding and using components we're already used to working with and are familiar with. So we'll touch on that in an upcoming episode. And there we go. hopefully we all have a better understanding of why it's so critical to keep our weight as light as possible, as that really does impact what we're able to use as our engine. So now that we've chosen our engine and propeller, we're going to plan on rigging our wings for our next section and then mounting the engine. And for those of you who are actually following along and building, Patreon becomes even more important, as we'll have the details of our Patreon member designing the engine mount for the Polini engines, which can also be adapted to other engines also. And Patreon is also another place to get questions answered. There just isn't enough time to answer all the questions on the YouTube comments, though I try and catch some as we go along. Until next time, back to building.